If we're doing our jobs right, one of the interesting things that happens in college for students is that they start to question their ideas about the world. And there's no better place to do that than in a sociology class. One of the skills that you develop in a sociology class is being able to spot the difference between a good argument and a bad argument. Further, you develop the ability to be able to decide for yourself what's credible and what's not. This brief lecture is going to cover some of those basic components that help us to understand the elements of a good argument. In the field of sociological research, there are two very, very important components. One of those is validity, and the other is reliability. When our research is valid, it means that we actually measured what we said we were going to measure. So as you read about research, one of the questions that you want to ask yourself is this research valid? The other is our reliability as researchers. Can you believe me? Am I trustworthy? Do I have the appropriate degrees and credentials? Have I gotten the proper training to be able to do this kind of research? Can you believe what I say? That's reliability. So as you go through the course and as we are exposed to different types of research, you always want to be thinking in terms of, is this research valid? Is the researcher reliable? Another thing that you also want to make sure you understand is the difference between a good and bad argument. Oftentimes, bad arguments are just simply opinions that sound like they might be facts. So a person will say, this is true or that is true, without actually backing it up with scientific data. So what we want to look for as we read about research is whether or not it is from a recognized scholar. Is it based on more than one source, or is it just this one case or example? Was the evidence or the data scientifically gathered? Was that process sound? Or is this person just cherry picking or pulling information from one place that doesn't really meet the scientific threshold? When we make a good argument, we might also want to offer up some of those opposing points of view. If there's no opposing point of view, it doesn't necessarily make an argument bad, but you want to think to yourself, are there other views that should also be presented here? We probably should be considering all of these various issues as we decide whether or not we believe in something. But unfortunately, most of the time, as human beings, we just simply don't delve deeply into why we believe what we believe. Unfortunately, we simply just tend to side with those people who express the same opinions and points of view that we already believe in. In this course, you should challenge what you believe in, and you should think about whether or not what the person is saying, who you believe, is credible. So the people that we decide who are on our team can be really any group with whom we identify. This is not necessarily a political, social, or cultural statement. It just simply is those groups with whom we identify most closely in our lives, and oftentimes what they say, we do tend to believe. We also sometimes take our cues about what is right or wrong from influential organizations or persons. And again, we want to make sure that what we're hearing from those people or from that organization is credible and is based on sound research. We have to be really careful in a sociology class about taking any kind of information simply at face value. We want to dig more deeply into whether or not the information we're digesting makes sense, is reliable, and is valid. So to make a good argument, what we want to do really is address a question, not necessarily just an issue. We don't want to simply shut down an argument with a statement. Instead, we want to ask a question so that we can uncover all the different aspects of an issue. This includes our ability to evaluate the evidence that's already there, to evaluate what we call normative claims. Normative claims are what we believe as a group. This helps us also to be able to formulate a conclusion about a particular topic or issue that is believable and credible. We also want to consider objections and alternatives to the views that we hold. There are many ways that we can go about crafting a good argument that is sound. We might use different sources of evidence or longitudinal research, which is over time. We might compare different countries, states, or communities, and conducting more research is always necessary. One of the things that we do have to understand when we're looking at research is that anecdotes are not the same thing as evidence. Evidence is scientific. Anecdotes are stories, narratives. Many times when a politician gives a speech, they will use an individual as an example. That's an anecdote. It is not evidence that something is true for most people or false for most people. So what we want to be sure that we look for in those arguments is the evidence rather than the anecdote. So in order to find that evidence, you have to be able to be curious, conduct research, ask questions, and to always have an open mind and be skeptical about whatever you think the answer to an issue might be. It's always good to challenge yourself and to think to yourself, what if I'm wrong? Unfortunately, as I said before, a lot of us just simply tend to side with our team without considering that there might be some other point of view that is more accurate. So what we should want to do is be skeptical of information which might not be steeped in facts. We also want to make sure that we don't just simply accept statements that support our position. We want to be willing to listen to the opposing evidence. And most of all, we don't want to use our own bad arguments to try and sway other people. Bad arguers are good at using tricks to make their points. They might use those anecdotes. They might suggest that things in the past were always better and we need to return to those. They might suggest to us that there are only two solutions and really neither one of them is good, so let's just keep things the way they are. They might try to oversimplify or just use data to prove their own position while ignoring all of the data that might be out there about a particular social issue. Your job in this class is to resist the urge just to side with your team. Be aware of these tricks that these arguments might present to you. Consider all of the evidence that is presented and then form your own conclusion based on all of the credible, reliable, and valid evidence that is out there. If you can do that, then you're well on your way to becoming a well-rounded citizen in today's very complex world. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.